would always be about buying lows. Perfect trade would be about selling highs. That would be the perfect trade. The problem is that's not normally realistic. So normally, however, the volume isn't in those locations. We understand from a normal supply-demand curve that the supply is usually at the highest at the top edge of a bracket, and it's usually at its highest, the demand is usually at its highest at the bottom edge of a bracket, and that's how the demand line works. So obviously there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of supply up here, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of demand down here. That's supply and demand, right? So obviously the best place for me to get the biggest volume possible is in here for a buy trade. It's the easiest place to get big volume, isn't it? Easy. Top edge, everybody's selling it, everybody wants short, everybody's fading it. That's the best place for me to get long. And obviously the best place for me to get short is here. So in the olden days, the cornering a market used to be at the bottom edge. Sellers, encouraging sellers into bottom edges, encouraging sellers into bottom edges, encouraging more sellers into bottom edges. But obviously that's getting harder and harder and harder as information becomes more balanced. However, the big conversations are still being had in the outside world, and those things suddenly become quite interesting, because if the value is doing this, for example, the sell trade looks like an absolute genius trade to press on through this area. So you're looking at that value line there and you're saying to yourself, you know what, I should be heavy short. I should be making a lot of money selling off the highs. But if you're going to corner the market at that stage, then obviously the best idea is to buy into that. That's going to be a brilliant trade, right? It's going to be a brilliant trade opportunity to buy into it. But obviously what sometimes happens is the value comes out of that trade a little bit. The value sometimes just changes all of a sudden, and all that selling into the low price suddenly changes into a buy. Now, sometimes you're not going to get any chance of being able to get that bit of business. So maybe it's just sitting here. If the value is sitting there, for example, and the price were to recover back up to the top edge, and it starts doing this kind of stuff at the top edge, you're saying, what's going on here? That shouldn't be right. Are they just manipulating it to try and get higher prices? And you're watching your value, and all of a sudden, what happens to the value line, which has been doing this, suddenly does this. You suddenly, wait a second. They've been cornering the market in the top right-hand corner, haven't they? And they get the big pop to the upside from the outcomes of an inside piece of information. They've been buying into that because they knew what was going to happen. So the insiders that know the insiders that know the insiders are buying into that supply, which is now massively obvious that the value is definitely bearish. And then all of a sudden the value flips. The sellers absolutely nowhere to go. And that's what happened on gold here. In the early stages of this gold trade, it looked like a brilliant little short trade, didn't it? The gold traders were all excited about that bit of short business. And I actually had a conversation with them this morning about this trade. Because the amount of buying that was coming in here, I said to everybody, look, that's interesting because it shouldn't be happening. So one of the things that you're all looking at and saying, well, but there's obviously a lot of supply up here. Yes, we know that. But would that not be the perfect location for cornering a marketplace? Would that not be the perfect location to corner the market? Yes, it would. And then all of a sudden, what you started to watch for is you started to watch that very substantial change in real yields. Suddenly, the sellers are in a bit of a pickle now, aren't they? There's a substantial change in the real yield storyline in the background here. Very, very substantial. Right through that whole process, their real yields changed the story. And all of a sudden, you're looking at this and saying, damn it, they've caught the sellers wrong. They've caught the sellers on the wrong side here. The sellers are going to start struggling to get away from this deal because there's so many of them. And then the price then breaks beautifully and then they just exit. That's how it works. That's how cornering a market works, guys. It's a classic example of what we were talking about yesterday as well. Somebody had inside information in here. It started to then show up on the value lines. The sellers are now wrong-sided because we were selling the top edge earlier. So if we hadn't seen that value changing, we could still have been in that short trade, working out, trying to make that short work. That would have been a mistake. So there's plenty of other traders, plenty of other people that would have been in that position that aren't as advanced as you guys are. But when you see the value changing against that heavy short, you know it's going to go into a buy squeeze. Perfect example of a buy squeeze. 85s to 91, $600 later, and only several minutes later, you've made a fortune if you decided to go for the value trade. It's stacked against you guys, but you've got to make sure you're open to that read. You've got to make sure you're open to that read. Otherwise, horrible things can happen to you. It's a very, very sharp correction on the 2s10s. Remember, we were aggressively selling the 2s10s for a flattener. Did you see what happened to the 2s10s? We got an incredible flattener on the 2s10s, guys. A very, very powerful flattener came back in, and it obviously helped to start to steepen the back end of the curve. Obviously, it went far too flat, and it's obviously bounced, so you've been buying into that. So I have resold the bond at the higher price again. I came back in after that flattener took place, and we did sell some more back off the 192s. Did anybody do similar? Did anybody try and do the same trade? So because we've seen the 2s10s flatten so much, I'm going to be keen to try and take the trade on. So there's the sell trade there on the retest after data, and we've had a very, very nice sell off 192s down to the halves here, and a nice $500 profit, guys. I'm going to grab a bit of lunch, and when we come back, we'll get started into the afternoon session.